Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar Behind the Scenes of PCI DSS 4. My name is Mirza Salhegic. I'm a head of product marketing at Comforte, and I would like to thank you all for joining us. As many of you know, the deadline for implementing all requirements of PCI DSS 4 is just a couple of weeks away. After March 31st, every impacted organization needs to do the assessment of the latest requirements. So whether you are new to PCI DSS or looking to refine your existing processes, our goal for today will be to provide you with actionable information and practical advice. So we're going to talk about current state of the adoption, main changes and challenges, as well as provide some recommendations and outlook. And as always, we have a couple of amazing panelists joining us today who are experts in their areas. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Heidi Shea. Heidi is a principal analyst at Forrester, where she leads research on data security and guides security leaders and tech executives in applying a zero trust, data-centric approach to securing data. Heidi advises on topics such as discovery and classification, security platforms, privacy-preserving technologies, data-centric security, and post-quantum security, so she can provide us with that general data security insights and recommendations. So welcome, Heidi. Glad to have you joining us for this discussion.
Thank you.
And we have another great guest joining us today, Jeremy King. Jeremy is a regional VP for EMEA at PCI Security Standards Council. His main responsibilities include raising awareness and adoption of PCI security standard, which includes educational efforts, as well as, of course, gathering feedback from the merchant and vendor community. So as you can imagine, Jeremy has a vast experience in the standard itself and some very valuable insights and recommendations to share that can be helpful for organizations who are still in the process of implementation. So welcome, Jeremy, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to the webinar.
Great. So before we begin with the discussion, I would like just to point one last thing. If you have any questions during the webinar, please go ahead and type them into the chat window, and we will do our best to address them. To address your questions at the end of the session. Okay, great. So PCI has introduced many changes in version 4. So to kick off the conversation, Jeremy, could you perhaps summarize what are the biggest changes in the version 4?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much. Let's start with an easy question. So PCI DSS version 4 really took something like 4 years to draft. And essentially, we haven't done an update, a major update to one of our standards since 2013. So you can imagine that quite a lot of technology had changed and quite a lot of the ways we go about doing things had changed. So we really needed to bring ourselves really up to speed. There was 1 or 2 requirements where we were, let's say, a little behind. So classic of that is our passwords. Now, I know I can talk to security experts and they would say, you know, you shouldn't use passwords, you should use other forms of identification. And I totally agree. But I also know I live in a world where I'm expected to use passwords. So passwords are still very much part of all our lives. And now we have increased the size of the number of characters that you have to have. And this is one of the requirements that we will be becoming in full force after the 31st of March, and we've increased that up to 12 characters. Now, 12 characters is the minimum. Our standards are always set at the minimum bar. So if you use 13 characters, you're in compliance. You're using more than 12. If you do 15, 18, 20, whatever, you know, you can always do more. If you don't use passwords at all, but use other forms of identification, authentication, that's equally fine. But in the password world, we know we live there, so we've set our standard now at 12 characters. We also know that people still use old equipment, and old equipment, sometimes they just can't cope with 12 characters. So in those instances, we're saying the absolute minimum where your system only allows it is 8. If it can't cope with 8, it's time it went in the skip. I'm really sorry. So that's one of the changes. Another change we've made is really around the actual scope. One of the things that we've always talked about within the council and never had a requirement around until now is actual scoping. And scoping 12.5.2 is a new requirement and basically says you need to understand where your card data is within your organization. Now, that's a very, very easy thing to say and quite a difficult thing to do, depending how complex your network is and how many other sort of web addresses and systems and servers you have. I remember talking to a merchant once, and he said, in essence, every stone I lifted up had 100 card data underneath it. So understanding where you have card data and how you're going to go about protecting it is really the first step. So understanding that with a good scoping process is really, really key. Another one, I'll finish at 3, we'll come back to some more, I know, is around authentication. And one of the things over recent releases of the standard we've been looking and introducing is something we call multi-factor authentication. So essentially, we know in the early days, we were all about trying to keep the criminals out. And nowadays, we know the criminals are going to find a way in. So what we want to do is we want to make it really, really difficult for the criminals to move about your systems and networks. And we do this by using multi-factor authentication. If they've got to keep authenticating themselves, then the chances are they won't have that information. So by ensuring and bringing in multi-factor authentication across the board, we're improving the chances that your organization is not going to get breached. And that's what we want. We want to protect your customers' data. So there's just a few things. There's a couple of other areas I will come back to and cover later on.
Okay, great. So password length, where's the data, sensitive data, basically the scope, multi-factor authentication, great. So, and do you see currently any kind of trends in terms of the adoption? So are there any kind of organizations that are leading in implementation and some kind of organizations that are struggling? And what do you think are the reasons for that?
No, absolutely. Some of it comes down to very simply, when do you start? When did you start? So one of the things the council has always done is always given a pre-release of the standard. So we released the standard in 2022. It never came into force until 2024. So we give people time. Some people use that time wisely, and some people unfortunately don't. So if you've left it until the last minute to start picking up and looking at DSS 4, you will find there's some challenges in there, because we knew when we were coming into this, there were going to be some requirements that would take time, that would need time for you to get the processes and procedures and systems in place. Another example is we put a new requirement around full disk, about disk level encryption, because what we realized was that sometimes when large amounts of cardholder data were being encrypted, then at the disk level, it may only need one person with one format to be able to decrypt that disk, and then it would sit unencrypted on a system. We're like, no, you can't do that. That's not secure. So certain things like that, which are affecting systems and affecting how you're using your systems, need a little bit of time. And so we've tried to correct that within that. Other areas where we're constantly listening to our global community, and one area where we've been paying close attention, and if you've been following PCI DSS closer, you'll have seen this, is we always have something we call self-assessment questionnaires. So essentially what we do is you have all of the requirements, but then we look at this and go, okay, if you're a merchant working in this particular field, let's say you're just working in e-commerce, then you don't need, some of those questions in the full set of requirements aren't going to apply. And so what we did, and what we always do, we look at those self-assessment questionnaires and think, what questions do we really want to include? What do we need to include? Scoping was one. And what we did with this one is we put in 2 new requirements, which were very pertinent to how we were being attacked, relating to scripts and script authentication. We were seeing the major cart attacks that were causing us a lot of problems. So we put in requirements around script authentication into what we call self-assessment questionnaire A, which is for e-com. A lot of merchants and a lot of acquirers came back to us and were like, we're struggling to get the solutions in place. And so we listened very carefully at that, and over the time we were hoping that solutions would come, especially for the small merchants. And really this is focused at the small merchants. And actually what we found, that we weren't going to get that solution in a cost-effective, timely manner. And so just recently, we released an update to self-assessment questionnaire SAQ-A that removed 643 and 1161, which are the two requirements around script authentication, just in SAQ-A. I must reiterate, just in SAQ-A. And what we've said is, actually, as a small merchant, you're probably going to utilize a payment page from a third party. I'll drop a couple of names. There are plenty to choose from, but if you're using the likes of Square or Block or Stripe or many others, or your acquirer may provide you a solution, then you don't touch the payment page yourself. That is being provided. And in that instance, what we're expecting is that that third party will provide the small merchant the confirmation that, yes, our scripts are secure, so you're okay. But if you're a small merchant and you are using something in your payment page, then what we're saying is, look, you've still got to show that your web page is secure against script attacks. Now, you can do that by using those two requirements. You can do that in other ways by working with with a different third party. So we've tried to reflect the situation we are hearing from our global stakeholders, from the community, that said, look, small merchants have got a bit of a gap here. Okay, we've listened, we've reacted. So we haven't, we've taken those out, but we're still expecting there to be good levels of security. And that's how we work. That's how we're operating. So organizations that are getting themselves ready, we haven't got long left before the 31st of March. So you really should be looking towards what you need to have in place. Just keep that going. A lot of organizations around the world go early. They see version 4 come through and they go, right, we are going to get ourselves aligned and evaluated and against version 4, and we'll get early. So we know from the feedback from those organizations that have been doing that so far, they haven't had massive issues. There are new things coming through, and certainly the ones where the future dated requirements, some of those have needed them to do some work, but in general things have been running quite smoothly, and we're quite pleased about that. We'll continue to monitor it, and if people do get in trouble or do have challenges, then talk to your acquirer, talk to your assessor, and talk to the council. We'll see, we'll try and figure out what's going on. But we're quite comfortable with the new standard. We're comfortable with the new requirements coming through, and it's now basically time to start using it.
Okay, great. Like a lot of useful information. So if, like, for those companies who are a little bit late now in the process, what would you recommend? Which would be the first things to start with to do something in order to address the biggest amount of requirements?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And I'm really pleased that toward the end of January, we released an updated version of our prioritized approach document. The prioritized approach document, we've had it for a while. And basically what that does is we've gone through all of the requirements and go, okay, this is the one you should do first. This is the one requirement that you should start with that's going to reduce your risk and basically improve your security. So we've updated that to reflect version 4. And essentially is, if you're late to the party, if you're just started, it's free to download on our website. Go on our website, go and download the prioritized approach document and the prioritized approach reporting template, and just start using that and going through with it, going through it. The other thing as well is, if you look at the requirements and see whether there are some in there that you're going to struggle with, then those are the ones you also need to address, such as the script authentication, the multi-factor authentication, the scoping, the disk level encryption. There are 51 new requirements coming through. Some people will have different challenges than others. Some will be, I've got no problem with that, but in another area they'll be like, oh, that's going to be a challenge. So you do need to do really a risk analysis. Do some assessment and see where are your challenges, so you can focus your efforts on that. But if you're really starting from scratch, the prioritized approach is a great document.
Okay, great stuff. So Heidi, in the latest version of DSS, there is a big emphasis on strong data protection. For example, use of strong cryptographic algorithms. And this is not something that is only relevant for PCI compliance, right? But also for more sustainable data security in general, right?
Absolutely. If we think about more sustainable data security in general, I mean, obfuscation of your data is one of the key approaches to protecting it. So if you're looking at PCI, requirement 4 covers that piece of it for strong encryption and different aspects of it as well, like whether it's to encrypt it before you transmit it, encrypt the session over where the data is getting transmitted, maybe both as well, and considerations for how you're handling the keys, certificates, and even having that inventory of keys and certificates as well. And I think what's really notable also about this version of PCI DSS is the mention of cryptographic agility. So that's been something that I've been watching really closely, helping organizations with as they're planning for their post-quantum security migrations. And PCI is, I believe, one of the first, or at least one of the earliest types of standards I've seen that have actually called this out. So to Jeremy's point, like some folks have gotten started on this early when it first came out and noticed it as well, but this is not an easy thing. So requirement 12 is the area where this gets highlighted specifically, doing things where you can monitor trends and what's happening with this space, changes to cryptographic vulnerabilities to stay on top of as well. And then a key thing around being able to inventory the algorithms in use, the purpose and where it's used as well. These are all things that are also going to help you to lay the groundwork for your migration to post-quantum cryptography. So this is a great thing for everybody. And what I love about it is how prescriptive PCI gets with all of this as a way of giving people a way to get started.
Yeah, that's quite good. I mean, in terms of some other regulations are not so exact, right? So one of the new requirements, and I think Jeremy mentioned that already in his first answer, is that now all users accessing cardholder environment needs to use multi-factor authentication, right? And from your research, Heidi, like and your client conversations, obviously, why is multi-factor authentication so challenging to implement in enterprise systems?
It tends to, I think, circle around maybe two different types of key challenges. One is that if we consider, not everyone is running on like a modern infrastructure and applications within their environment. A lot of organizations, especially if you've been around for a while, you've got a bit of a Frankenstein of really old things, the legacy systems, as well as the newer ones as well. So there may be the situation you run into where this older system does not support a modern MFA solution. So that requires some workarounds to handle or maybe additional security tools to think about. The second challenge, I think, it comes down to the people, right? Because this is something that you're putting in front of somebody who's trying to do their job. It could potentially change their workflow in a way that they feel is disruptive. Maybe there's friction with the use of it as well. So that can be something that can cause a bit of resistance. So there's an element here of being able to support the users in using MFA. Why are we doing this? How do you use this? And then also having IT be aware of this to field those initial questions as you're rolling it out to get people used to this.
Yeah, I mean, we also see the similar picture in terms of those older systems. Like, for example, a lot of our customers are using HP nonstop systems that are kind of standard in the payment still, and adding MFA to those systems is not always straightforward, and that's why we have also expanded our capabilities to support that, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe like we talk a little bit about the topic of risk-based approach and flexibility. So organizations now can tailor their security controls on their unique risk profiles rather than strictly, one size fits all model. And the introduction of that customized approach, I think, is interesting for a lot of people. So, Jeremy, could you please explain the major differences between customized approach and compensating controls?
No, absolutely. And I think just to relate this to some of what Heidi was saying there, One of the other things that we're also seeing is a massive change in the use of technology within organizations, and a major shift towards using the cloud. And this is no longer using the cloud as just another server. This is data being bounced around all over the place. And in part, this is what caused the council to have to look towards creating a customized approach, because as Heidi said, our requirements are very specific. They're very scripted, you know, and so what we found was, or what we were finding was, certain of our stakeholders were coming back and going, the way that we use this particular data in this particular way just does not fit in with this requirement. It doesn't meet it. But we understand what the security weaknesses are, what the security risks are, and therefore we are confident that even though we can't meet the requirement as it's written, we're meeting the intent, because we're doing all of these extra steps to show it. And when you get some of the biggest stakeholders in the world coming and saying that, you think to yourself, hey, okay, we need to allow a way then where, because we can't stop technology, people are going to use technology, so we have to adapt. And we're like, okay, we'll adapt then. So what we came up with was a way of saying, okay, so if you're doing something differently, then we should be able to allow that, provided that the intent of the security is being met or exceeded. And so we came up with what we called the customized approach. Now, historically, we've had compensating controls, and compensating controls are very similar, because essentially that's also saying we can't actually meet the requirement as it's written because of X, Y, and Z. In those instances, the compensating controls were generally something of a temporary nature, that a system was needed to be updated and we weren't getting that in for 6 months, so we knew we'd got a gap. And so whilst we've got this gap, we're going to watch this bit like hawks, and we're going to have all these other, you know, security features in place to mean that we'll meet the intent. So you can see the similar language. You can't make the requirements as written. We're going to put things in place to make sure that we are secure, we're meeting the intent, we're the same level of security. So compensating controls I see as temporary. There's something happening in your organization. As you said, you may have an old system that you're updating. It can't do multi-factor authentication. It's just not capable. But all these other things we're doing, until we get this new system in place, we'll make sure we're meeting the intent of the requirement. Great, fill in a compensating control, have the QSA assess it, and you're good. Now, if you're actually saying, we don't do business like that, we use the cloud and it's never going to be like that, this isn't a temporary thing, this is permanent for how our business is now working. So then you're right, okay, in this instance then you need to go down the customized approach route. What this means is you're going to work with your QSA and you're going to sit down and go, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and this is how we are confident that this isn't going to form a security risk. And you'll have done a targeted risk analysis, you'll have that information, you will have done all of the assessments, you will show the QSA what it is you're doing. This isn't a quick process. This isn't a process that you can go, actually, I've failed my assessment here, so I'll do a customized approach. Doesn't work like that. This is something you do ahead of time. And then when the QSA comes in, they're going to see it all. They're going to be really happy, hopefully. You've done the job properly. And they'll go, we approve and sign off what this is saying. And that means that then next year, because it's a permanent change, you've got all that information. It becomes an easier process. So year one, it's going to be something that's going to need more effort. Year 2, 3, 4, etc., it's going to be easy. So temporary compensating controls, permanent customized approach. You can do it on one requirement. You can do it on lots of requirements. All depends how your organization is managing its technology and managing how it's handling the transaction. So this is trying to bring in some flexibility just to reflect how technology is changing.
And I love that, because I feel like this custom approach it's a game changer for so many organizations, and it really requires an in-depth understanding of an assessment of what are specific data risks that you are trying to mitigate to properly map the controls and the measures you're taking in order to do that, and really document everything very clearly.
Yes. Yes. So it's not lowering the bar. The bar is staying at the same high level. It just allows your organization then to, continue working using the new technology in the ways that we've said. And absolutely, it's a great game changer. I've seen a couple of people go through it. It's not something quite a lot of organizations are like, I understand PCI DSS, I've done it for a few years, version 4 is coming through, I'm comfortable with it. No, I'm perfectly fine. But some of those have come through and they've done it on just a couple of requirements, and they're like, yeah, this has made life a lot easier.
Yeah, speaking of custom approach and so on and so forth. So Heidi, what would be your recommendations to organizations looking to implement kind of custom data security controls? What are some of the most critical capabilities they should think about implementing to strengthen the data security in general? Not in a sense that, we have already implemented and this is our custom approach, but think in a way that I'm implementing right now, and what would be the kind of most effective things to start with?
Most effective things to start with. I think back
I'm glad you're getting the hard questions, Heidi.
It's deceptively difficult, because if you're thinking of the really foundational things that you must start with, and this also goes back to Jeremy's point earlier about scoping as well. Like I talk to a lot of organizations about the capability to discover, to identify just where is your sensitive data. I think that is a very key capability to have, the ability to classify it as well. Is it sensitive? Is it not? Is this card holder information, or is this not? Or is this something else? Is it intellectual property? Like, these are foundational elements, but it's very, very difficult, especially if you think about how distributed everything is, where data is going everywhere. You've got copies of data in different places. It's a whole effort to first identify it, but second, to do that cleanup, and then also think about applying controls. And oftentimes, the approach here is that you want to do these things in parallel, because if you're waiting to really fully uncover and identify everything and discover it and classify it before you move on, that's likely not going to happen, and it's going to keep slowing you down, because the volumes of data that you have it's going to continue to grow. And today I also see a lot of buzz around data security posture management, and I think it's for good reason, because people are struggling to really understand and have visibility into data risk specifically, because this is going to help, once they have that understanding of risk, give them that roadmap of what it is that we need to do next. So I think these are core things that every organization needs to focus on to start building further capabilities, because once you understand risk, then you can start to think about what are those appropriate controls that are going to have maximum impact.
And I think one of the real key things that Heidi said there is this securing data. A lot of people think, I've got to do PCI DSS, and then I've got to do ISO 27001, and then I've got to do cybersecurity, and I've got to do data security. No, data security, just understand what your needs are from a data security perspective. Understand how the criminals are attacking us. The criminals are using the cybercrime and techniques there. We're seeing an awful lot of ransomware where they're coming in and then trying to either encrypt everything or just insert malware to steal data. So coming right back to the start of what Heidi was saying, your cryptographic techniques, your cryptographic housekeeping need to be really good, and that just applies across the board. You'll meet, if you sit down and go, right, what are our key things from a security perspective we need to focus on for our organization, for protecting our data, our customers' data, you'll find when you've gone through that, you'll be ticking boxes, you'll be meeting most of the PCI DSS. So it is really understanding your security right across the board, because it is so important to get your crypto techniques right, your data security technique right, your management, your risk assessments, all of it adds up to this overall data security, and that's what you need to be working on today.
Mm-hmm. And getting to least privilege as fast as you can when it comes to accessing data. And I still want to reiterate that point about cleaning up your data as well, because it's really easy to want to hang on to data for as long as possible, but not all of it has that value years and years from now, especially if we're talking about certain types of cardholder information that maybe you just really needed it for a transaction, and maybe it's not really of use a year from now. So that's something to consider. Is this something that the organization can delete, to get rid of, dispose of, so that it is no longer within scope for you to have to protect and do anything about? At a certain point, the data becomes a liability the longer you hang on to it if it has no use.
You know, two more cracking points, Heidi. So I'm jumping in again, Mirza, because these are so critically important points. One is we are terrible at removing privileges. So we, you know, in this modern world, we get promoted or we get moved to other areas, and we like gather privileges, and we don't tend to lose them. So, you know, in an organization on an annual basis, having, and this is a PCI requirement, do a check. Does that person still need all that access? Are they still involved in the payment, you know, data side? Or have they moved into, you know, have they been promoted, or have they been moved into another area? They don't need it. Remove those privileges. And then as for, oh my goodness me, since day one of the council, we've always been saying, if you don't need it, don't store it. We are terrible as organization for just hoovering data. It's like our little, you know, comfort blanket. We just suck in data that we don't always need, and it just sits there, and the criminals just love it because they can go and use it. So check your privileges and get rid of data you don't need. Two brilliant points, Heidi.
Yeah. Yeah, privileges. They're not Pokemon. You don't have to collect them all.
They do.
Yeah, I mean, like very often, at least, you know, that compliant to one specific regulation sometimes is seen as a burden, right? But as we have discussed right now, addressing specific, especially data protection requirements can help me strengthen the security posture and so on and so forth. So do you see, like Jeremy, do you see from your perspective, from PCI perspective, that some other long-term benefits of PCI DSS, just beyond that meeting the compliance, I mean?
Oh yes, absolutely. It's a good data security standard. It's you know, it's recognized, thankfully, because of an awful lot of hard work by a lot of people, and you know, and it's used around the world. A lot of the regulators are very comfortable that this is a good base level for data security. So, you know, use it as a way of looking at your company and seeing, you know, how are we protecting data. There's a really good set of requirements across a wide range of areas for your organization. So having that understanding of what's important for your organization, especially as we move into this more connected world. One of the things we're beginning to see within the council is that companies that had nothing to do with payments, that are connected to the company that is working on the payments, we're finding the criminals were able to gain to the payment data through this third party, this fourth party, this connected party, because they were like, yeah, we need to monitor, you know, that particular piece of equipment to see if it's working fine, or we need to monitor how this data is being used. And suddenly they were being connected into areas where they should have been aware that they had access to card data, and if they need it, they then need to understand they've got a responsibility. So we're using, in the early days of payments, it was a very easy model. You know, I had merchants, acquirers, you know, issuers, and the brands, and that was it. Now we have so many other organizations in the payment life cycle providing some fantastic services. They're doing a lot of really great things. They can either make the processing easier, but every company that comes in and touches this payment data has a responsibility, and you need to know who has that access. And this is back to the scope. Who is touching all my data? Where is this data going? And especially in the cloud, it's like, how many other parties are playing with this? So, and then you've got to start asking, so what are you doing? What are you secure? Are you PCI DSS compliant? Have you taken this security seriously? Because I'm putting all my customer data through you, so I want you to be responsible as well. And a lot of them will be going, yes, we take security very seriously. Here's our PCI DSS compliance, and that then you're in a position of understanding, who's responsible for the security of the data as it goes through the chain. And again, building that up is important for everyone's sake. So it's a changing world with technology, and new technology is always coming through. We're always playing catch up, but working with the stakeholders, understanding who's in your life cycle, who can touch the data, helps you build up this picture of data security.
Yeah, so basically getting even better visibility into the data landscape and better data governance, right?
Oh yes, definitely.
So Heidi, like I mentioned at the beginning, and I know, of course, that your research is also focused on zero trust. Do you see like parallels between zero trust approach and PCI DSS standard?
Many, and also parallels between PCI and other compliance requirements, whether you're trying to follow ISO or whether you're trying to do HIPAA. I mean, a lot of these things, they have common elements, right? And we also, I think, Jeremy, you pointed this out earlier, this is really, it's a bar that's been set here with PCI, and the requirements that are in here, I think we can also consider them to be, it's a floor, right? Things that you can do. You can always go above it as well.
Yes.
So if you're trying to do something like zero trust, and we've done this ourselves at Forrester when we do the mapping of here are the elements that you have to consider with the zero trust approach, and it really lines up nicely with a lot of key things that are called out within PCI and other types of compliance requirements. So it's a nice way to get prescriptive about specific things to do, but also recognize that, sure, if you are PCI compliant, you've already mapped to a lot of other requirements, and it gets you further along than you might think at the end of the day of meeting these other requirements as well. And a lot of organizations, they are doing zero trust. They may not necessarily call it zero trust, but they are.
Agreed. So I would like also to add something to that in general, because look, in like DSS in general is helping, of course, in terms of the benefits for the data security, for data protection, for addressing the regulations. In addition to that, we know that also from our customer base that because we are offering tokenization, obviously, so tokenization plays a key role in PCI DSS, but also is in the meantime used for protecting data before it moves to the cloud. So basically a business benefit in terms of I'm enabling data-driven initiatives, because a lot of organizations still cannot move the data to the cloud because it's unclear. And if we protect it in the right way, it can be on one hand moved to the cloud, which is obviously kind of, again, compliance and data protection regulations. But on the other hand, it can be also used by business applications, and it can be analyzed, which can basically produce data-driven insights, increase revenue or reduce cost, and so on and so forth. So we see in that data-centric approach really a kind of new paradigm how to balance security with innovation and business growth. Basically, that's quite interesting pattern that is happening right now. Okay, I think we will speed up a little bit. I also see increasing amount of questions coming in. So I think we addressed this a little bit already in the conversation, but technology is changing rapidly. Data is stored all over the place. AI is growing quickly, and the threats are evolving at the same time. So given these rapid advancements from both of your perspectives and opinions, what do you think? What will be how the standard will evolve in the future?
Shall I go first then, or do you want to go first? So you mentioned AI, and AI is a huge development, and it's good, bad, and bad and indifferent all at the same time. So for many organizations, AI is going to help them in that process. It's going to make life easier, especially in the call center environment. But on the flip side, the criminals are going to use AI to basically gain access to data. So organizations are going to, know your customer authentication is going to become much more difficult because of AI. So it's understanding that whilst it's also going to be a fantastic tool for improving how the customer experience is in your organization, you need to understand how the criminals are also going to use it against you.
I would agree. I'm latching on and thinking about just the implications that come from all of that. It's two sides of the coin when we're thinking about AI here, because I am seeing some advances in technologies, for example, for data discovery, classification, that AI is helping to improve the accuracy and make it better and function better, which is really exciting. We're seeing AI come in various security tools to help the practitioners with things like investigating incidents. That's another benefit to come. Still some things to work out. We're early days in a lot of these areas, but it's interesting to see how this functionality or this capability is getting embedded within different types of security technologies. But on the flip side, yes, it's also thinking about, well, how are organizations going to be trying to use AI, whether it's a co-pilot type capability within something else or an AI application that they're developing, whether for internal employee use or something that may be customer facing, and really thinking through, like, what does this AI have access to? What can it pull from in terms of data? So that's bringing me back to some of those previous points about what are the core capabilities you have to build. It's understanding that data, but it's also controlling the access to it, whether it's a human that's trying to access this data, or in the future, or maybe even now, like an AI that's trying to pull from it. I've seen a lot of interest over the last year in capabilities around data access governance as a way to get that initial scope and control in place for using AI.
Okay, great, thank you. As I said, we have like questions coming in, so let me okay, so first question, I will read it out loud, and then please Heidi or Jeremy just pick one. So we are a SEQA organization. Does the scope of the storage of credit card information only apply to consumers, or does it also include employee credit card data?
So the answer to that one is very much depends. And it depends on whether or not that employee credit card data is a corporate credit card or their own personal credit card. If it's their personal credit card, absolutely, that's in scope. If it's a corporate credit card, you will need to talk to the brand that issued you that card, whether that's MasterCard, Visa, etc., to see what their expectations are for your security requirements around that. So that is a bit of a compliance issue one there.
Okay, cool. Next question is, what do we need to be compliant before the deadline? Where and when will enforcement start?
So enforcement starts on the 1st of April, but it depends when you do your, so most people do an annual validation against PCI DSS. And so if your annual validation is the 1st of April, then the 1st of April, you will do all of the new requirements. If your validation is not until March 2026, because you did it in March 2025, that will be the point at which you will next do your next validation will be when you do version 4.0.1. What I would say to you is, between then and now, whenever your next validation is due, then you need to make sure that you're ready. So use the time, as we said right at the start, use your time to get ready. So if your next validation is in July, then you better start doing some work just to make sure you can see how ready your organization is and where some of the challenges are going to be, so you can give them a bit of focus. So doing that full gap analysis as soon as you can, even now. Don't wait until the 1st of April. Start doing the gap analysis now to see what it is you're going to need to get in place by the time you're going to get your next compliance assessment.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. And I think we have time for one more. So has password rotation standard also changed? Password
Yes. Don't know, sorry, I'll have to get back to you on that one. I honestly don't know off the top of my head. I will make a note and send that through to you, Mirza.
Okay, thank you. So whoever asked the question, we can get back to you by email. Okay, so I think that's it for today. I think the discussion could continue for a couple of hours, but like we only have 40 minutes, 45 minutes. So thank you so much, Heidi and Jeremy. It was great talking and also learning from you. And also big thanks to the audience and also for the questions. I hope you found the session helpful and gained some insights here for your own PCI journey. So I wish you all the best and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you and take care.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.